This is the 16th in a series of programs I'm doing on wisdom and what famous thinkers in philosophy, psychology, literature, and religion have said about it. In my last program, I dealt with the question, how might one acquire wisdom? This program will continue on that theme and also will raise some additional questions. For example, how wise might one become? And also, what might a wise person look like? And time permitting, towards the end of the program, I'll be providing some recommendations about some famous wisdom books. But first, a brief review of some of the points I made in my last program. I reiterated the working definition of wisdom I'm using. Wisdom is good sense, good judgment. If one asks a philosopher what he or she thinks wisdom is, the philosopher generally will define wisdom as a knowledge of reality, a knowledge of the way things really are. In other words, what's true, what's false about life and people. Socrates claimed the most important question any of us can attempt to answer in life is the following: how shall I live? The great thinkers, in talking about the path to wisdom, have said that among the steps to wisdom are the following. That first of all, it requires an attitude of humility, an acknowledgement that one may not have wisdom. The idea is that some people might make the attempt to gain wisdom if they didn't believe wrongly that they already had it. Once one adopts this attitude of humility, the next step on the path to wisdom is evaluating one's life experiences. Indeed, some experts have said that wisdom is really life's experiences well digested. Besides humility and evaluating one's experiences, the path to wisdom, of course, will also include much introspection. Indeed, that in some way or another is connected with evaluating one's experiences. But introspection goes even beyond that. It involves self-criticism. We know the Greeks attached so much importance to the idea of knowing oneself. And of course, another step, very important step on the path to wisdom, is studying, learning. Confucius put it this way. He said, to be fond of learning is close to having wisdom. Again, to be fond of learning is close to having wisdom. It is also interesting that so many of the famous thinkers have said that suffering can also be a catalyst to helping us to achieve wisdom. Indeed, Pascal, the very famous French philosopher and mathematician, put it this way: 1 hour's pain is a better teacher than all the philosophers put together. The idea is that suffering, both mental and physical, can help us to achieve perspective in life, can help us to understand and appreciate what's really important in life. Suffering has led some people to seek solutions, or at least coping mechanisms, by reading the great books in philosophy, psychology, literature, religion. Suffering has also led many people to change the way in which they live, to change the way in which they live. Thomas Merton, the most famous of American monks, I think is an outstanding example of this. In his autobiography, entitled The Seven-Story Mountain, Thomas Merton points out that before he became a monk, he was a graduate student at Columbia University. And he describes himself in those days as being spiritually dead. He says he was smoking 40 to 50 cigarettes a day. He was going to bars 3 or 4 nights a week and often waking up with hangovers. He also fathered an illegitimate child. And Merton claims that it was his suffering, the idea that he considered himself to be spiritually dead, that provoked him to seek wisdom. And eventually, he sought solace in a monastery in Kentucky, the monastery at Gethsemane, and later converted from Protestantism to Catholicism and became a Catholic monk. And as I indicated before, arguably the most famous Catholic monk in U.S. 20th century history. It's been said that the connection between suffering and wisdom is best illustrated by this expression: life is made significant by the struggle. The path to wisdom also involves solitude and silence. It involves deep listening to ourselves. And the path to wisdom also involves escaping any harmful conditioning we have been exposed to. I think it's fair to say that one's family, the advertising industry, TV and music industries often have harmful influences on us and condition us in some harmful ways. And the idea is, if we're going to achieve wisdom, it's very important that we escape from the so-called prison of any harmful conditioning we have been subjected to. Illustrations, for example, I should say examples of some harmful conditioning would be some advertising slogans that became famous years ago and occasionally you'll still hear in one way or another. I recall a luxury automobile company using this slogan to try to sell its cars: "You are what you drive." And also some fashion designers using the expression, "You are what you wear." Not to mention so many commercials for beers and other products trying to convey to men what it means to be a real man, and certain fashion magazines trying to convey to women what it means to be a real woman. And I suggest to you, so much of this advertising can involve some very harmful conditioning of people, and it's very important that people be aware of this. Another important step on the path to wisdom is skepticism, doubting. The idea is dogmatism. Dogmatism can be an enemy to living a more fulfilling life. Paul Tillich, the very famous American theologian, put it this way. He said, and I'm quoting him, "Doubt is the necessary tool of knowledge." Doubt is the necessary tool of knowledge. And Voltaire, the famous 18th century French intellectual and writer, said this: "Doubt is not a very agreeable state, but certainty is a ridiculous one." And Gordon Allport, very famous former professor of psychology at Harvard, in his book entitled "The Individual and His Religion," distinguishes between mature religious believers and immature religious believers. And Professor Allport says that in his opinion, a mature religious believer is someone who has deep religious beliefs, but also has some doubts and is willing to consider evidence that runs counter to his or her beliefs. Whereas Professor Allport says that immature religious believers are people who have no doubts about their beliefs and are not willing to consider any evidence that may run counter to their beliefs. Another important step along the path to wisdom is right association. That's a Buddhist term. The idea is we should seek the company of other people who are also seeking the truth, other people who are also seeking wisdom. And it's important that we try to avoid toxic people, happiness stealers, very dogmatic people. For example, people who are 100% certain that they know the mind of God. An important tip that I've gotten from some of the famous writers concerning right association is this: that the kinds of people we probably should be hanging out with are people who in their daily communication with other people habitually use expressions such as "I think," "I believe," "it seems to me." in my opinion. The Buddhists set forth an eight-step plan to wisdom. And one of the most important steps in this path, this Buddhist path to wisdom, involves what the Buddhists call mindfulness. The Buddhists claim that the most important task of our lives is taming our minds, and that cultivating mindfulness is indispensable to taming one's mind. Well, what does mindfulness involve? Well, it involves thinking about our thoughts. It involves monitoring our thoughts. It involves working at diminishing our hatred, our greed, our lust, our vanity, our feelings of inferiority. The idea is that these negative feelings get in the way of clear thinking. And the idea is when we are experiencing hatred, envy, lust, the Buddhist idea is that when one acknowledges that that is one's present mood, present thought, one should come up with some kind of antidote so as to think positive thoughts, thoughts that will help us to see more clearly. The idea is the Buddhists believe that we can get into bad thinking habits. We can acquire bad thinking habits. And they believe it's very important that we abandon what is unwholesome in our thinking patterns, and that we cultivate that we should cultivate what is wholesome in our thinking. The Buddha put it this way, and I'm quoting him: "We are what we think. With our thoughts, we make the world. Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. But once mastered, no one can help you as much, not even your father or mother." The idea is that our thoughts can help us, but our thoughts can also hurt us. Mindfulness also involves careful analysis or awareness of what one consumes, whether it's food, drink, or culture. And the Buddhist idea of mindfulness also involves deep listening not only to ourselves, but to others. And it also involves loving speech. The Buddha, as did Jesus, attached much importance to the way in which we talk to other people. And the idea is, if we can become more aware of how we talk to other people, and if we can try to be loving in our speech when we talk to other people, that can give life a sweeter flavor. And of course, as I've indicated in so many of my programs on wisdom, the great thinkers have said that wisdom involves cultivating virtue, that trying to cultivate virtue is indispensable to a life of wisdom. The idea is that wisdom can never be divorced from virtue. Among the famous thinkers who have promoted this idea are the following: Plato, Confucius, Jesus, Buddha, Spinoza, Kant, Emerson, Tolstoy, and many others. Socrates said this about the connection between virtue and wisdom, and I'm quoting Socrates: "Virtue is wisdom, either in whole or in part." Seneca, the very famous Stoic philosopher, whom I also cite, said that in his day, so many young people who were questing for wisdom believed that if they just learned some interesting ideas, that constituted wisdom. And Seneca goes on to criticize these young people. He said what they didn't understand is that acquiring important ideas is only a part of acquiring wisdom. That the idea is that one should use these ideas to transform one's character, that is the real essence of wisdom. Indeed, Maimonides, very famous Jewish sage, said we can recognize a wise person not only by their knowledge, but more importantly, by their behavior. Seneca claimed that wisdom consists essentially in using sound ideas to improve one's character, to become a more just, loving person. Emerson, the American philosopher, picked up on this theme. Emerson said this, and I'm quoting him: "Character is superior to intellect. Character is superior to intellect." And Goethe, the famous German intellectual, said this. He said that intellect without character is far worse than character without intellect. I'll say that again. Intellect without character is far worse than character without intellect. I think the great thinkers were agreed that the best student is not the one with the highest grade point average, but rather the student who combines the greatest understanding of self and life with virtue and decency. The idea is that the very best students have a deep understanding that being a loving, just person is in one's selfish interest. Remember, Aristotle claimed that wisdom is knowledge of the highest things. Well, Aristotle and so many of the great philosophers did not consider the standard academic subjects to involve knowledge of the highest things. Aristotle did not consider history, chemistry, foreign languages, for example, to involve the most important kinds of learning. Psychiatrist M. Scott Peck put it this way: wisdom cannot be certified by academic degrees. Wisdom cannot be certified by academic degrees. You know, there is a national magazine, a very popular national magazine here in the United States, that each year ranks the colleges and universities in America. I suspect that the great thinkers would find this national magazine's ratings to be amusing and to find the standards that it uses to be amusing. Well, what standards would Jesus, Buddha, Plato, Aristotle use in judging a college or university? What standards would Plato, Jesus, Aristotle, Buddha use in ranking America's colleges and universities? Well, I'm quite confident they would place emphasis on which universities best teach students to understand themselves and life. Again, one of the standards the great thinkers would use would be which universities best teach students to understand themselves and life. And also, which universities do the best job in producing loving, just, warm-hearted people. I wonder, given those standards, where Harvard and MIT and other Ivy League schools might rate. Some years ago, it occurred to me that perhaps all report cards, K through graduate school, should list a subject that I've never seen listed on any report card. Again, whether it be a high school report card or a college or graduate school. It seems to me that all report cards should list as the first subject justice, kindness, decency. And I don't think any teacher, any professor has a right to rate anybody, by the way, to evaluate anybody in terms of how just or kind or decent the person is. So my idea is that justice might occupy the first place on the report card, But there'll be no grade. The idea is that the student will have his or her thinking stimulated about the idea that there is nothing more important we can accomplish in life than being a just person. And that's more important than learning mathematics or a foreign language. I also suggest that perhaps all evaluation reports of teachers, professors, government officials, business people, junior executives, for example, and other people in the business world, that all evaluation reports should also, in first place on the evaluation report, list the word justice, the category justice. And again, I don't think anybody should be able to give anybody a grade for that category, but that, again, it would stimulate workers' thinking throughout America about the importance of trying to be a just person, and perhaps that is the most important quality anybody can have. So many of the great thinkers have claimed that, again, being a just person is the most important thing we can hope to accomplish in life. I suspect that in the wisest culture, in the wisest nation in the world, the people who would be most admired would not be the richest people, would not be the most famous people, would not be the best entertainers, would not be the best athletes, but rather the most virtuous people. Again, I suggest to you that in the wisest culture in the world, the most admired people would be the most virtuous people. And now for a summing up concerning the question, how does one acquire wisdom? I think that on the occasion of Gandhi's death, Mahatma Gandhi's death, the Prime Minister of India, Nehru, in his eulogy, praising Gandhi and pointing out what Gandhi's real value was to the world, helps illustrate what might be perhaps the most important steps to acquiring wisdom. He said this, Nehru, again in eulogizing Gandhi, Gandhi taught us to remember all of the big things in life and to forget all of the small things in life, which so often preoccupy us. Wisdom, one acquires it by taking the widest possible view of life. Again, one acquires wisdom by taking the widest possible view of life, by trying to see life whole, by trying to acquire perspective, by attempting to see the forest and not just the trees. The question also arises, how wise can one become? Well, the great thinkers, again, provide some illumination here. Aristotle said this, there is a foolish corner in the mind of the wisest man. And Socrates put it this way, there is much imbalance in all people. Writer Henry Fielding said this, no man is wise at all hours. And the American writer Emerson said that there is no such thing as a permanently wise person. It's also been said that once one acquires wisdom, a significant amount of wisdom, one must work to retain it. The idea is that when one achieves wisdom, there is always the danger that one might forget some of the important elements of wisdom, and one might neglect to practice some of the important ideas that one has learned. Oscar Wilde provides some illumination here. He claimed that we can realize an important idea in a single moment, and but that we can also lose that important idea in the hours that follow. He said this, and I'm quoting him, it is so difficult to keep heights that the soul is competent to gain. It is so difficult to keep heights that the soul is competent to gain. I pointed out in previous programs that one of the things I do every day to remind myself of some important ideas, ideas I wish to remember and keep in my mind every day. I have taken notes, copious notes, on books I've read over the years, and so many of my notes I have placed on 3x5 index cards. So many of the quotes I use in my programs I've written on 3x5 index cards over a period of more than 30 years. I now have a collection of more than 2,000 of these cards. And I've indicated to you in past programs, one of the things I do every morning while dressing is to examine 4 or 5 of these cards that I've placed strategically in my bedroom. And I find that the information on these cards, usually the information consists of quotes from famous thinkers on important aspects of daily living. I find that these daily reminders help get my day off to a good start. Ralph Waldo Emerson suggested that each of us write his own Bible. He suggested that we take quotes from Shakespeare, from Milton, Plato, Aristotle, and other great thinkers, and make a book of these quotations and periodically examine these ideas and try to make these ideas a part of our lives. I see I'm running short on time. I'll continue with this theme next week, and also I do hope to get to those book recommendations. Finally, Henry David Thoreau reminds us that we are all artists. In his masterpiece, Walden, Thoreau penned the following words: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."